Taras Shevchenko. The Quiet Voice of Freedom. Learn English through History, B1. Introduction. The Man Who Spoke Without a Sword. Welcome everyone. Today, you are about to hear one of the most powerful and emotional stories in human history. This is not a story about kings. This is not a story about armies. This is not a story about victories on the battlefield. This is the story of a man who had no power, no money, no army, and no freedom. A man who was born a slave. A man who was told his whole life to stay silent. And yet, his words shook an empire. His name was Taras Shevchenko. He did not rule a country. He did not command soldiers. He did not wear a crown. But today, millions of people remember his words. They read them. They feel them. They carry them in their hearts. Why? Because words can be stronger than swords. Because truth can be more dangerous than weapons. And because one quiet voice can change history. This story is about pain. This story is about silence. This story is about freedom. And if you are learning English, this story is perfect for you. It is written in simple English. The sentences are clear. The ideas are deep but easy to follow. You will not just improve your English. You will feel this story. Now let us begin. This is the true story of the boy who was born without freedom and became the voice of a nation. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Was Born a Slave. Taras Shevchenko was born in the year 1814, in a small village in what is now Ukraine. But from the very first day of his life, Taras was not free. He was born a serf. A serf was a person who belonged to a landowner. Not to himself. Not to his dreams. Not to his future. To another human being. This meant Taras could not choose where to live. He could not choose his work. He could not choose his life. His fate was already decided. Taras was born into a poor peasant family. His parents worked hard every day. They worked the land. They obeyed orders. They lived in fear. They were not lazy. They were not weak. They were trapped. When Taras was still a child, tragedy entered his life. First, his mother died. She was his warmth. She was his comfort. She was his safety. After her death, the house became cold. A few years later, his father also died. Now Taras was an orphan. A child without parents. A child without protection. A child without freedom. At a very young age, Taras learned a hard truth. The world was not kind to weak people. He had to work. He had to obey. He had to survive. Many children in his position became angry. Others became broken. But Taras became something else. He became quiet. He watched people. He listened. He remembered. And inside him, something began to grow. A silent talent. Even as a child, Taras noticed things others did not. He noticed faces. He noticed emotions. He noticed pain. And he wanted to draw them. He had no paper. No pencils. No teacher. So he drew in the dirt. He scratched pictures on walls. He copied images from churches. Drawing was not a hobby for him. It was an escape. When he drew, he was free. People around him noticed his talent. But talent meant nothing for a serf. A serf was not allowed to dream. Still, Taras did not stop. He worked during the day. He drew at night. He was hungry. He was tired. But his hands kept moving. Life under a master. Taras belonged to a rich landowner named Pavlo Engelhardt. To Engelhardt, Taras was not a child. He was not an artist. He was property. At first, Taras worked as a servant. Later, Engelhardt noticed the boy could draw. Instead of giving him freedom, he used him. Taras was trained as a house painter. He painted walls. He decorated rooms. His talent was useful. But his soul was ignored. Engelhardt often traveled. And Taras traveled with him. This is how Taras left his village. This is how he saw cities. This is how he saw another world. A world where art existed. A world where people read books. A world where some men were free. And the more Taras saw this world, the more painful his own life became. The first taste of education. In the city of Vilnius, Taras saw real art for the first time. Paintings. Statues. Artists at work. He watched them with burning eyes. He wanted to learn. He wanted to understand. Sometimes, secretly, he copied paintings. Sometimes, he listened to educated people speak. But education was dangerous for a serf. A thinking slave is a threat. Still, Taras took the risk. He read when he could. He listened when he could. He remembered everything. Inside him, two forces were growing. Pain, from injustice. And fire, from truth. A life without choice. No matter how talented he was, Taras could not decide his future. Engelhardt decided everything. One day, Engelhardt decided to move to St. Petersburg, the capital of the empire. Taras went with him. At that time, St. Petersburg was one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. Grand buildings. Wide streets. Palaces. Art academies. But for Taras, it was still a cage. A golden cage. He walked the streets as a servant. He saw freedom, but he could not touch it. He was close to artists. But he was not one of them. He was close to books. But they were not for him. He was close to life. But he was not allowed to live it. And yet, this city would change everything. The boy who refused to die inside. Many people in Taras' position gave up. They accepted their fate. They became silent forever. But Taras did not. He did not shout. He did not fight. He did not rebel with weapons. He resisted inside. Every drawing he made was an act of freedom. Every word he remembered was an act of rebellion. He was still a slave. But his mind was already free. And soon, the world would notice him. Chapter 2. The Artist Who Bought His Freedom. In St. Petersburg, Taras Shevchenko lived between two worlds. One world was bright and beautiful. It was the world of art, books, and ideas. It was the world of educated people, painters, poets, and thinkers. The other world was dark and heavy. It was the world of obedience, fear, and silence. It was the world of a servant who belonged to a master. Taras walked between these two worlds every day. During the day, he served Engelhart. He carried things. He followed orders. He stayed invisible. But in the evenings, when no one watched him, Taras became someone else. He became an artist. Meeting the right people. In St. Petersburg, Taras began to meet people who would change his life. One of them was a young Ukrainian artist named Ivan Shevchenko. Shevchenko noticed Taras' drawings. He saw the skill. But more importantly, he saw the pain and honesty in them. Shevchenko asked questions. Who taught you? Where did you learn this? Why are you not studying art? Taras answered honestly. I am a serf. I belong to a landowner. Shevchenko was shocked. A talent like this should not be in chains. Shevchenko decided to help. He introduced Taras to other artists. He took him to galleries. He showed him real paintings. He spoke about freedom. For the first time, Taras felt something new. Hope. A dangerous dream. But hope was dangerous. Freedom was not free. Taras' owner, Engelhart, was not kind. He was not generous. He did not believe in dreams. He believed in money. If Taras wanted freedom, someone had to buy him. That was the law. A human life had a price. At first, Engelhart asked for a very high sum. More money than most artists could ever earn. But Shevchenko did not give up. He spoke to writers. He spoke to painters. He spoke to important people. Slowly, a small group formed around Taras. They were not revolutionaries. They did not plan violence. They planned something quieter. They planned to save one man. The famous painter. One of the people Shevchenko contacted was Karl Bryullov. Bryullov was one of the most famous painters in the empire. He was respected. He was powerful. When Bryullov saw Taras' drawings, he understood immediately. This was not an ordinary talent. This was something rare. Bryullov agreed to help. But even he could not simply demand Taras' freedom. So they made a plan. A clever plan. A portrait that changed a life. Karl Bryullov painted a portrait of a famous poet, Vasily Zhukovsky. Zhukovsky was close to the royal family. People respected him. People admired him. The portrait was beautiful. So beautiful that it was decided to sell it in a lottery. Tickets were sold. Money was collected. Every coin had one purpose: to buy Taras Shevchenko's freedom. Taras did not know everything at first. He only knew that people were helping him. He waited. He hoped. He feared disappointment. Then one day, it happened. The money was enough. The moment of freedom. In the year 1838, Taras Shevchenko was officially freed. He was 24 years old. After 24 years of slavery, he finally belonged to himself. No chains. No master. No orders. Just freedom. It was not loud. There were no celebrations in the streets. But inside Taras, something broke open. He was no longer a servant. He was no longer property. He was a man. And he cried. Not from joy alone, but from pain, from memory, from everything he had survived. Freedom felt unreal. But it was real. A new life begins. Soon after gaining his freedom, Taras entered the Imperial Academy of Arts. This was one of the best art schools in Europe. Just a few years earlier, he could not even choose where to live. Now, he was studying art. He learned technique. He learned history. He learned discipline. And he worked harder than anyone else. Because he knew something others did not. Freedom can be lost. And he would never let that happen again. The birth of a poet. During this time, something else happened. Taras began to write poetry. Not in the language of the empire, but in his native Ukrainian language. This was dangerous. Ukrainian was considered a peasant language. A language of villages. Not of books. But Taras did not care. This was the language of his pain. The language of his childhood. The language of truth. He wrote about suffering. He wrote about injustice. He wrote about his people. He did not write to entertain. He wrote to awaken. Words that cut deeper than knives. His poems were simple. But they were powerful. People read them and felt something move inside. They remembered their own pain. They remembered their own silence. Taras was not shouting. He was speaking quietly. But quiet words can travel far. Very far. And the empire was listening. A free man with a dangerous voice. Taras Shevchenko was now free. But freedom brought responsibility. He was no longer just an artist. He was becoming a voice. And voices that speak truth often attract attention. Not all attention is good. Soon, Taras would learn that freedom of the body does not always mean freedom of words. And the most dangerous prison is not made of walls. Chapter 3. The Poet Who Spoke the Truth. When Taras Shevchenko began to write poetry, he did not plan to become famous. He did not plan to start a movement. He did not plan to fight an empire. He simply wrote what he knew. Pain. Memory. Truth. But truth is never small. A book that changed everything. In the year 1840, Taras published his first book of poetry. Its name was Kobzar. This book was not thick. It was not expensive. It did not look dangerous. But inside it, there was fire. For the first time, Ukrainian people saw their lives written with dignity. Their suffering was not mocked. Their language was not treated as weak. Taras wrote about slavery, injustice, lost freedom, broken people, forgotten history. He wrote about Ukraine not as a province, but as a living soul. People read the poems and felt something wake up. They said, "He speaks for us. He feels our pain. He remembers what others want us to forget." Fame without safety. Taras became known very quickly. Artists respected him. Students admired him. Young people copied his poems by hand. But fame has a price. The empire noticed him. And the empire did not like what it heard. Taras did not directly call for rebellion. He did not shout slogans. He did not hold weapons. But his words were dangerous. Because they reminded people that freedom once existed. And once people remember freedom, they begin to ask questions. The fear of words. The rulers of the empire believed something very simple. Guns can kill people. But ideas can destroy empires. Taras' poems spoke about the past. About Cossacks. About lost independence. He reminded people that slavery was not natural. That silence was not destiny. This was enough. The empire became afraid. A poet under watch. Taras continued to write. He continued to paint. He continued to travel. He visited Ukraine again. He saw villages. He saw poverty. He saw broken lives. And his words became sharper. Not louder. Sharper. He wrote about rulers who lied. About people who forgot their roots. About power built on fear. Every poem was calm. But every poem cut deep. Soon, Taras was no longer just a poet. He became a symbol. And symbols are dangerous. The Secret Circle. In the mid-1840s, Taras became close to a group of educated Ukrainians. They talked about history. They talked about freedom. They talked about the future. This group was not violent. They did not plan war. They believed in education. In culture. In slow change. But the empire did not care. To the empire, thinking itself was a crime. The arrest. In 1847, everything ended suddenly. Taras Shevchenko was arrested. Not for fighting. Not for violence. For writing. For thinking. For refusing to be silent. His poems were taken. His drawings were taken. His letters were read. The authorities found what they wanted. Words. And words were enough to destroy him. The emperor's order. When the case reached the emperor, the punishment became personal. The emperor read Taras' poems. And he was angry. Not because they were weak, but because they were strong. Taras was sentenced to exile. But this was not ordinary exile. He was sent far away. To military service. To the edge of the empire. And there was one special order. Taras Shevchenko was forbidden to write and paint. This was not an accident. They did not want to kill his body. They wanted to kill his voice. A new prison. Taras lost everything again. His freedom. His friends. His art. He was given a uniform. He was given a rifle. He was watched every day. The poet who spoke for millions was forced into silence. But silence does not always mean defeat. Sometimes, silence is preparation. And Taras was not finished. Not yet. Chapter 4. Exile, Silence, and Inner Fire. Taras Shevchenko was sent far away from everything he loved. Far from art. Far from books. Far from friends. Far from Ukraine. He was sent to the edge of the empire. To dry land. To cold winds. To endless silence. This was exile. Not just a punishment of the body, but a punishment of the soul. Life in uniform. Taras was forced to serve as a soldier. He wore a uniform. He followed orders. He lived among men who did not know who he was. Every day looked the same. Wake up. March. Stand guard. Sleep. No art. No poetry. No freedom. And above all, one strict rule. He was not allowed to write. He was not allowed to paint. This rule was meant to break him. Because for Taras, writing and painting were not hobbies. They were air. The hardest silence. At first, Taras tried to obey. He stayed quiet. He followed rules. He waited. But silence was heavy. His thoughts were loud. His memories were painful. At night, he remembered his childhood. His village. His parents. His people. He remembered freedom. And the pain became too strong. Secret words. Taras began to break the rules. Quietly. Carefully. In secret. He wrote poems on small pieces of paper. He hid them. He memorized lines so they could not be taken. Sometimes he wrote on scraps. Sometimes he wrote in his head. They could control his hands. But not his mind. They could ban his pen. But not his thoughts. Art without tools. Taras also painted. Without paint. Without canvas. He drew with charcoal. With dirt. With whatever he could find. He drew faces. He drew pain. He drew freedom. Every drawing was dangerous. If discovered, he could be punished harder. But Taras accepted the risk. Because a life without expression was not a life at all. Years of suffering. The years passed slowly. The climate was cruel. The food was poor. The loneliness was deep. Taras became sick again and again. His body suffered. But his spirit did not die. Instead, it hardened. Like metal in fire. A man changed by pain. Exile changed Taras. He became quieter. Stronger inside. More focused. He no longer believed in easy hope. He no longer trusted promises. But he believed in truth. And truth was enough. The long wait. For 10 long years, Taras lived this life. 10 years without freedom. 10 years without voice. 10 years without home. Many people would have given up. Taras did not. He survived. And survival itself became an act of resistance. The return. In 1857, after many years, Taras was finally released from exile. The ban was lifted. He could return. But the man who returned was not the same man who had left. He was older, sicker, but wiser. He had lost years, but he had gained something deeper. Unbreakable inner freedom. A quiet victory. Taras did not celebrate. There were no crowds. No music. No applause. But inside him, there was calm. He had survived the empire. And the empire had failed to silence him. Chapter 5. Death of the Man, Birth of the Voice. When Taras Shevchenko returned from exile, he was finally free. But freedom came late. His body was tired. His health was weak. Years of exile had left deep marks. Still, his mind was alive. A changed world. The world he returned to was not the same. Friends had grown older. Some were gone. Some were afraid. The empire was still strong. Censorship was still present. But Taras no longer feared it. He had faced the worst. And survived. The final years. Taras returned to St. Petersburg. He painted again. He wrote again. But now his words were quieter. Not weaker. Deeper. He spoke about dignity. About memory. About human worth. He did not shout for revolution. He whispered truth. And whispers last longer than screams. A lonely man. Taras never built a family. He had friends. He had admirers. But deep inside, he was often alone. He had given his life to words. And words had cost him everything else. Still, he did not regret it. The last winter. In the winter of 1861, Taras became very sick. Cold filled his room. Pain filled his body. He was only 47 years old. He knew the end was close. But there was no fear. He had said what he needed to say. Death in silence. Taras Shevchenko died quietly. No crowds. No speeches. No power. Just silence. At first, he was buried in St. Petersburg. But that was not the end. The return home. Later, his friends fulfilled his wish. They brought his body back to Ukraine. They buried him on a hill near the Dnipro River, where the land could hear him, where the people could remember him. And something changed. The voice that could not die. Taras Shevchenko was dead. But his voice grew stronger. People read his poems in secret. They passed them from hand to hand. They memorized lines. The empire tried to erase him. But words do not disappear. They travel. From heart to heart. From generation to generation. From poet to symbol. Taras became more than a man. He became a symbol. Of resistance without violence. Of strength without weapons. Of freedom without power. He showed the world something important. You do not need to rule to matter. You do not need to shout to be heard. You do not need a sword to change history. The death of a man. The birth of a voice. Taras Shevchenko died as a human being. But he was born again as a voice. A voice that still speaks today. 7 life-changing lessons. From Taras Shevchenko. 1. Freedom starts inside. Taras was a slave. But his mind was free long before his body was. Lesson. If your mind is free, no one fully controls you. 2. Words can be stronger than weapons. He never fought with a sword. He fought with truth. Lesson. Use your voice wisely. Words shape the world. 3. Silence does not mean weakness. Taras spoke calmly. But his words shook empires. Lesson. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. 4. Pain can become purpose. His suffering did not destroy him. It shaped him. Lesson. Your pain can become your strength. 5. Never forget who you are. He wrote in the language of his people. Even when it was dangerous. Lesson. Your roots give you power. Don't lose them. 6. Truth has a price, but it lasts. Taras paid a high price for honesty. But lies died with the empire. Lesson. Truth survives longer than fear. 7. One life can awaken millions. Taras never ruled a country. But he awakened a nation. Lesson. You don't need power to matter. You need courage. This was not just a history lesson. This was a story about freedom. About silence. About strength. And if you are learning English, you learned something important too. You learned how to follow a long story. How to understand deep ideas in simple words. How to listen calmly and grow naturally. That is how language is truly learned. Not by memorizing rules, but by living inside meaning. Taras Shevchenko never wanted to be a hero. He wanted people to remember who they were. And they did. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to our channel. Because here we don't just teach English. We tell stories. We build strength. One word at a time.